What's the main way to reduce your reliance on one currency? You stop using it, of course. And in today's world, this is becoming more prominent. De-dollarization needs to be talked about more because it's happening slowly, yes. Think about it like death by a thousand paper cuts. But one recent piece of news stands out above the rest, and it involves BRICS, the group of emerging countries led by Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. So in this video, let's understand specifically how BRICS is reducing their reliance on the dollar and how news about $28 billion could be an economic catalyst of its future. But before we go forward, we need to go back to understand the ideology of BRICS and why they want to reduce their reliance on the dollar, which is currently the world's reserve currency. The acronym BRIC was actually created unintentionally by an economist who wrote a piece back in 2001 as to why emerging markets were going to play a large role in the coming decades. Brazil, Russia, India, and China didn't have their first official meeting until 2009, where the countries discussed the need for economic reform, demanding a greater voice and representation in international financial institutions. South Africa would join soon after in 2010. They were done playing second fiddle to the Western world, specifically the United States and its currency, the dollar. But how do you disrupt the world's reserve currency? When you say it out loud, it sounds like a difficult task, especially once you understand the three powers that the world reserve currency has. So let's talk about them and how BRICS has positioned themselves to disrupt each one of them. The first power of the world's reserve currency is stability. Stability makes it much easier for international trade. Just like when you communicate with someone, you need a common language. In this case, a common currency is needed that everyone can agree on. In today's world of high inflation and lack of transparency with certain monetary policies, it's hard for countries to know the value of the other currency that they're trading with. So to protect themselves, many countries used the dollar as the intermediary currency because both sides knew the stability and the value of the currency that was being used. But BRICS has been putting a wrench into this as well. Since that first meeting in 2009, the BRICS countries have slowly been reducing the amount of transactions involving the dollar. So much so that the Chinese yuan just surpassed the dollar when it comes to transactions going in and out of China. India has made it a priority to do more transactions in their currency, the rupee, and the dollar is basically no longer used in Russia as they too have turned mostly to the Chinese yuan. The second power of the world's reserve currency is its exclusivity to buy oil. After World War II, the US created something known as the Bretton Woods Agreement, where gold was the basis for the US dollar and essentially tied all currencies around the world to the dollar. The dollar remained a powerhouse until the early 1970s when the United States ran out of money and was no longer able to continue their arrangement of dollars for gold. So when the gold deal ran out, why didn't countries just go back to using their local currencies? Because the dollar was tied so closely to oil purchases. The US made a deal with Saudi Arabia, making the dollar the only allowable currency to buy oil in. And this was the birth of what we know today as the petrodollar. So in order for countries to continue powering their country with oil, they needed to hold the dollar to do so, making the dollar a necessity for countries around the world. But even this handshake agreement has been challenged by BRICS. Like I mentioned earlier, the last country to join BRICS was South Africa in 2010. That is until 5 new countries were added to the bloc on January 1st, 2024. Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. Now, BRICS strategically has 6 of the top 10 oil producers in the world. And we are already starting to see a combination of local currencies and oil escalate de-dollarization. Saudi Arabia has sold their oil to countries like China in other currencies besides the dollar. India and the UAE have agreed to only make oil transactions in local currencies. And countries like Russia and Iran, well, they're highly sanctioned countries and they haven't exactly been using the dollar lately. This will all make sense once we talk about the third power of the country that holds the world's reserve currency, which is it becomes an investing juggernaut. Now, historically, power number 1, which was stability, and power number 2, which was exclusivity to buy oil, meant countries needed to hold the dollar to facilitate international trade and power their other country with energy. A country's holdings of dollars is called a dollar wallet, but typically countries would hold more dollars in their dollar wallet than needed. So instead of having them just sit there losing purchasing power to inflation over time, they would use those dollars to invest in US markets. And these investments were typically made into US treasuries, otherwise known as bonds or US debt. Basically, the United States and many other countries offer investors an opportunity to give said government upfront money to help fund their operations in exchange for receiving that money back with interest on top after the debt matures. And this is why the United States has been an investing juggernaut for so long. Countries were forced to hold many dollars, which made it silly not to invest in what was known as the safest investment. And as long as the United States government continued to pay back their investors, it was a win-win. But now this is all changing. Not only are these countries investing less new money into US markets, but they're also selling off old investments of US debt, reducing their exposure to dollars and the United States as a whole. This chart here shows the top holders of US debt, with Japan, China, and the UK holding the top 3 spots. And if we look a little closer at China's total by month, you will see that over the last 12 months, they have sold off over $100 billion worth of US debt. This, of course, fits the de-dollarization narrative, but what if I told you that BRICS also offered debt to investors, and how this news of $28 billion is a first of its kind? Before we get into that, I make videos about world news impacting the dollar and the US economy, so if you like topics like this and want to see more of them, make sure to subscribe to the channel. The BRICS Bank, otherwise known as New Development Bank, is expected to make a $28 billion bond offering, according to its chief operating officer. These bonds will be made available to member countries, banks, and governments with the main goal to finance infrastructure projects. And while this isn't the first bond offering by the bank, it's the first in another sense, which helps ties the entire video together. But before we go further, it's important to first understand the legitimacy of the New Development Bank and how this institution could be the financial stability that BRICS needs. The New Development Bank was founded in 2015 by the 5 BRICS countries and describes themselves as a multilateral development bank aimed at mobilizing resources for infrastructure and sustainable development projects in BRICS and other emerging markets. They get their financials audited by one of the big 4 accounting firms, Deloitte, and have a credit rating by 2 of the largest credit ratings agencies, S&P Global and Fitch. Credit ratings for countries and companies have a range from AAA all the way down to D. The New Development Bank has a credit rating of AA+ with S&P and AA with Fitch. For context, the US government has a credit rating of AA+ and AA+, and China has ratings of A+ and A+. The New Development Bank has a portfolio mostly made up of dollars, interestingly enough, but it makes sense as dollars are very attractive to investors, and these countries have to put their dollars somewhere. The majority of the bank's bond offerings in the past have been issued in dollars or the Chinese yuan, but have also explored issuing bonds with the Russian ruble and working with the Johannesburg Stock Exchange for a bond offering in the South African rand. But for the first time ever, the New Development Bank is issuing a bond offering in a basket of currencies. According to the bank's president, the South African rand, Brazilian real, and Indian rupee will be included. This is a big swing for the bank, as this will be one of the largest bond offerings that doesn't include the dollar that it's ever had, which is why all of this so strongly ties together. These bonds, of course, will promote the use of local currencies and contribute ever so slightly to the decreasing demand of the dollar. Not to mention that these investments are going towards funding projects that are supposed to improve the countries that are involved and will be, in theory, replacing investments from what would have been the International Monetary Fund or World Bank, who have been criticized for predatory loans to countries that struggle to pay them back. Just ask Argentina. The main goal for the New Development Bank is to become the lender of choice for emerging markets and developing countries, but my main concern for this bond offering is, will anyone be interested? The Brazilian real and South African rand aren't exactly seen as the strongest or most attractive currencies, and even though India has the 5th largest economy in the world, not many seem interested in holding their currency. Just ask Russia. Even if this bond offering is not a great success, it's a step in the right direction for their long-term strategy. Remember, death by a thousand paper cuts. And as long as the new development bank continues to satisfy their investors, maintain or improve their credit score, they could be in a situation where they are the leading economic voice for BRICS in the future. Speaking of satisfying investors, the United States government is quietly on a path to disrupt the confidence of their US debt investors. Find out the new record they just hit, the future implications it could have, and why the rest of the world is loving it by watching this video here.